She had been sleeping on the streets of Chicago for 2 years. He was a wounded billionaire who didn't want to show up alone at his ex-fiancée's wedding. The proposal was straightforward: $1,000 for one night pretending to be a couple. But when she walked into that luxurious ballroom, something unexpected happened. The bride recognized her, and what came next shocked everyone present. This is the story of Tiffany and Vincent, an unlikely encounter that transformed into the most powerful love neither of them imagined possible.
Morning arrived slowly in Chicago, dragging with it that cold that cuts through skin and paralyzes bones. Tiffany opened her eyes and for a second, just one, forgot where she was. Her body ached, her back protesting from the night spent leaning against a cold display window of a closed department store. But it wasn't the physical pain that weighed heaviest. It was the silence. That deafening silence that screams inside those who've lost everything and have no one left to tell. She stood up slowly, straightened her posture like someone gathering the pieces of an invisible armor, and ran her hands over her wrinkled clothes. No matter how much life tried to break her, Tiffany Erickson still knew how to carry herself with dignity. And that, for her, was all she had left. 2 hours later, she was already in motion. The routine was always the same: walk to Millennium Park, use the public restroom, wash her face with ice-cold water, and comb her hair with her fingers before a cracked mirror. There was a strange cruelty to it all, as if the city tested her every day to see how much she could take before giving up. But Tiffany didn't give up. She couldn't, because giving up meant accepting that Caroline Mercer had won, and that never. So she kept going, step by step, building dignity where there was no ground left to stand on.
Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She'd already learned to live with hunger, to negotiate with her own body for small truces until she could scrape together a few dollars. Sometimes she helped unload boxes at small markets. Other times she cleaned display windows or carried bags for elderly people leaving the grocery store. Nothing steady, nothing secure, just crumbs of kindness and coins that barely paid for a decent meal. But Tiffany turned every penny into fuel. It wasn't pride, it was survival. That hard-earned money represented the difference between being invisible and being human, between existing and disappearing completely into the shadows of a metropolis that forgives no one. When the sun began to set, she returned to the same spot, always near lit storefronts, security cameras, places where light still reached. Tiffany was afraid of the dark, not the darkness itself, but what it hid. The voices that emerged late at night, the stares that cut through her body as if she were just another disposable object on the sidewalk. So she chose carefully where to sit, where to lie down, where to close her eyes without ever truly sleeping. Because sleeping meant vulnerability, and vulnerability on the streets was synonymous with danger. So she only rested her eyes, always alert, always ready to move if something got out of control. That night, however, something was different. Maybe it was the exhaustion accumulated from months without real rest. Maybe it was the uncomfortable feeling that this life, if it could even be called a life, was draining something essential from her, something that wouldn't come back if she continued like this. Tiffany looked at her own hands, calloused and trembling from the cold, and thought about who she had been: legal assistant, competent professional, a woman who dreamed big and believed that effort was worth it. Where was that Tiffany now? Buried beneath rubble of false accusations, betrayals, and abandonment? Or was she still breathing, hidden in some corner of her chest, waiting for just a spark to resurface? She straightened her posture once more, as she always did when sadness threatened to win. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and drew the icy air into her lungs. It wasn't just a physical gesture. It was an act of resistance, a silent affirmation that she was still here, that she still mattered, that she still deserved to take up space in this cruel and indifferent world. Because deep down, Tiffany knew one thing: as long as there was a thread of hope, no matter how thin, she would keep fighting. She would keep believing that fate hadn't spoken its last word. And it was there, in that exact moment, sitting beneath the cold light of a closed storefront, that she decided to stay. She didn't know why, had no logical reason, just a strange intuition, almost magnetic, that something was about to change, as if the universe were preparing an encounter, as if, after so long walking alone in the dark, someone was finally about to cross her path and see who she really was.
Vincent Abbott wasn't used to walking the streets. Normally, there were drivers, security guards, assistants who organized every second of his meticulously controlled schedule. But that night, he needed air. He needed to escape the cameras, the journalists, the uncomfortable questions about his ex-fiancée's wedding to his ex-best friend. The irony was so cruel it almost made him laugh, almost. So he dismissed the car, shoved his hands into the pockets of his Italian wool coat, and set out walking through the streets of Chicago as if he could disappear into the shadows. As if, for a few hours, he could be just another man trying to understand where it all went wrong. He turned a corner, and that's when he saw her, sitting there, leaning against the display window of a closed store with a posture strangely elegant for someone who clearly had nowhere to go. It wasn't the position of someone who'd given up. It was the position of someone still resisting. Vincent stopped. He didn't know why. Maybe because her eyes, even tired, still gleamed with something he recognized. Pride wounded, but not destroyed. She noticed he was looking and lifted her chin, as if saying silently, "I'm not invisible. I'm still here." And it was that small, powerful gesture that made him take a step toward her.
Tiffany watched the man approach, and all her survival instincts went on alert. He was different. Expensive clothes, confident posture, but something in his eyes revealed a recent wound. She knew that look. It was the look of someone who'd been betrayed, of someone still carrying the mark of an emotional stab that hurt more than any physical injury. He stopped a few steps away, respecting her space, and asked in a low voice, almost hesitant, "Are you okay?" Tiffany almost laughed. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody even looked at her, but he had asked. And there was something genuine in that question that completely disarmed her. Vincent wasn't quite sure what he was doing. Maybe it was loneliness speaking louder. Maybe it was the desperation of having to show up alone at the wedding and face the pitying looks, the mouths whispering about the abandoned billionaire. Or maybe it was just this woman, with her deep eyes and unshakable dignity, who made him feel he wasn't alone in that pain. He took a deep breath and said something he even couldn't believe he'd say. "I have a strange proposal for you. $1,000. I just need you to accompany me to an event tomorrow night." The words came out fast, almost stumbling over each other, as if he feared she'd leave before hearing everything. And then he added with brutal honesty, "I don't want to show up alone."
Tiffany blinked, processing what she'd just heard. $1,000. It was more money than she'd seen together in 2 years. It was the difference between another week on the streets and the possibility of renting a room, taking a hot shower, eating a decent meal. But it was also strange, absurdly strange. Who was this man? Why her? And what did he really want? She studied his face, looking for signs of danger, of lies, of a trap. But all she found was exhaustion, vulnerability, and an urgency that seemed as desperate as her own. So, against all her instincts of distrust, she murmured, "Why me?" He smiled, a small smile, almost sad. "Because you look like someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and still remain standing." The words hit Tiffany like a punch to the stomach, because they were true. Because this stranger, in less than 5 minutes, had seen something in her that no one else saw. She looked away, feeling tears threaten to rise, but controlled herself. She couldn't cry. Not in front of him. Not now. So she nodded slowly, still wary, still trying to understand if this was real or just another cruel illusion that life was about to rip away from her. "Okay," she finally said, her voice hoarse. "I'll go."
Vincent felt something strange in his chest, a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief because he wouldn't face this alone. Guilt because he knew he was using her vulnerability to cover his own wound. But there was also something else, a curiosity, an inexplicable connection pulsing between them, as if two castaways had found each other in the middle of the ocean and, without knowing how to swim, decided to hold on to one another. He pulled his wallet from his pocket, took out some bills, and extended them to her. "Here, so you can get ready. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I'll send a car to pick you up here." She took the money with trembling hands, but didn't say thank you, because she knew this wasn't charity. It was a deal. And deals, she understood, deals had rules. Charity only brought humiliation. He turned to leave, but stopped. He looked back one last time and asked something he hadn't planned to ask. "What's your name?" Tiffany hesitated. It had been so long since someone asked her name, so long since she existed as anything but an anonymous shadow on the streets. "Tiffany," she answered softly. "Tiffany Erickson." Vincent repeated it mentally, committing it to memory, and then, with a nod, he disappeared into the night, leaving Tiffany alone once more, but this time with something different in her hands. It wasn't just money. It was a chance. Small, fragile, unlikely, but still a chance.
The car arrived promptly at 7. Tiffany was waiting in the same place, but unrecognizable. With the money Vincent had given her, she'd managed to get a simple but elegant dress from a secondhand store. Navy blue, understated, with a cut that flattered her figure without drawing excessive attention. She'd washed her hair at a shelter, combed it carefully, and even found a lipstick in a soft tone that brought color back to her pale face. When she got into the car, the driver greeted her with respect, as if she were just another important guest. And Tiffany, for an instant, almost believed it, almost allowed herself to feel she deserved that treatment, almost forgot that hours earlier she'd been sleeping on Chicago's frozen sidewalk. The ballroom in Lake Forest was everything she'd imagined and more. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling like captured constellations. Tables covered with impeccable white linen cloths, flower arrangements that cost more than she'd earned in entire months when she still had a job. Tiffany took a deep breath before entering, feeling the weight of stares turning in her direction. But they weren't looks of contempt, they were looks of curiosity. Because she walked with her head held high, shoulders relaxed, steps measured and firm. It wasn't arrogance, it was muscle memory.
It was the recollection of who she'd been before everything collapsed. And strangely, that woman still lived inside her, just waiting for the opportunity to resurface.
Vincent saw her enter, and something inside him trembled. He expected her to fulfill the agreement, to play the role of polite and discreet companion. But he didn't expect this presence, this natural elegance that didn't come from expensive clothes or jewelry, but from something deeper, pure dignity, survival transformed into grace. When she came close, he extended his hand and she took it without hesitation. "You look beautiful," he said, and it wasn't just politeness, it was truth. Tiffany smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile, and answered softly, "Thank you for giving me the chance to remember who I am." And Vincent realized, in that moment, that this was no longer just a deal. It was something else, something he couldn't yet name, but that was already beginning to change everything. They circulated through the ballroom, greeting guests, exchanging polite and empty words that were part of that social game. Tiffany behaved with impressive naturalness, as if she'd been born for this, and in a way she had. She knew the codes, the subtleties, the unwritten rules of that world. She'd worked with executives, lawyers, powerful people who demanded precision and poise. And even after 2 years on the streets, that knowledge hadn't been erased. It was just dormant. As she conversed with a businessman about financial markets, Vincent watched her sidelong, fascinated. Who was this woman? Where did this strength come from? And why the hell was she on the streets?
That's when Caroline Mercer appeared, elegant as always, dressed in a champagne tone that sparkled under the lights. She crossed the ballroom with a radiant bride's smile. But when her eyes met Tiffany's, the smile froze. She stopped mid-stride, blinking as if seeing a ghost, because that's exactly what Tiffany represented, a ghost from the past that should have remained buried. Caroline quickly composed herself, but not quickly enough. Tiffany had seen it, had seen the fear, the recognition, the guilt that crossed the bride's face for a fraction of a second before being replaced by a mask of aristocratic coldness. Caroline approached, her smile now forced, and greeted Vincent with familiarity. "Vincent, so good to see you here." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were ice. Then she turned to Tiffany, analyzing her from toe to head with surgical precision. "And who is your companion?" The word was spoken with a slight twist of contempt, subtle enough to seem polite, but poisonous enough to mark territory. Tiffany held her gaze without backing down, because she knew women like Caroline, knew that type of power built on others' insecurity, and she was no longer afraid, not after surviving the hell this woman had created for her.
Vincent felt the tension grow between the two, and something in him ignited, an instinctual need to protect Tiffany, even without fully understanding what was happening. He placed his hand on her back, a subtle but possessive gesture, and said firmly, "This is Tiffany Erickson, my companion, and someone extraordinary." The words fell into the air like a declaration. Caroline blinked, surprised by Vincent's tone, but maintained her smile. "Erickson. Interesting. That name sounds familiar." Tiffany felt her heart race, but kept her voice calm when she answered, "It should be. After all, you made sure I'd never forget it." And it was there, in that exact instant, that the entire ballroom seemed to fall silent, waiting for the next move in a game that had just begun.
Caroline took a step back, but the smile didn't leave her face. It was a trained smile, polished, one of those that hides panic with rehearsed perfection. "I'm sorry, dear, but I think you're confused about things." Her voice came out smooth, almost maternal, as if dealing with a disoriented child. But Tiffany wasn't a child, and she wasn't confused. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and when she spoke, each word came out sharp as a blade. "I'm not confused about anything, Caroline. 2 years ago, you planted an anonymous tip accusing me of stealing confidential documents from the company where I worked. You knew I was innocent, but you also knew that I was too close to the position you wanted." The ballroom around them began to fall silent. Heads turned. Conversations died in the air. Caroline laughed. It was a short laugh, nervous but still calculated. "This is absurd. You're clearly going through a difficult time and—" But Tiffany interrupted her, her voice now louder, firm, filling the space as if reclaiming everything that had been taken from her. "I lost my job, my reputation, my apartment, my friends, everything, and you knew it. You knew exactly what you were doing when you sent that anonymous email to the compliance department." The people around them no longer pretended. They were listening openly, mouths agape, absorbing every word like watching an accident in slow motion. Caroline looked around, realizing she was losing control of the narrative, and her voice came out louder, defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about. Vincent, please control your companion." Vincent was paralyzed, not from disbelief, but because everything was beginning to make sense. Tiffany's posture, the elegance that didn't match someone living on the streets, the precise vocabulary, the way she moved in that environment as if she belonged to it. She wasn't a stranger to this world. She had been part of it, and someone had destroyed her. He looked at Caroline, really looked, and saw for the first time the fear in her eyes, the guilt, the mask cracking. And then he did something that surprised even himself. He turned to Tiffany and said, with deadly calm, "Continue." Tiffany felt her legs tremble, but her voice came out steady. "You saw me as a threat because I was competent, because the executives trusted me, because I was being considered for the promotion you thought was yours by right. So you created a narrative, planted digital evidence, and threw me to the wolves." She paused, took a deep breath, and for the first time in 2 years, allowed the pain to show. "I was investigated, publicly humiliated, fired without the right to defend myself. No one wanted to hear me. No one believed me. And you watched it all from the front row, knowing you destroyed my life out of pure envy." Her voice broke at the end, but not from weakness, from anger, from accumulated indignation that finally found a voice.
Daniel Foster, who had been watching everything from afar, slowly approached. He was the groom, but he was also a lawyer, and lawyers recognize when someone is telling the truth. He studied Tiffany, then Caroline, and something in his expression changed. "Caroline," he said, his voice low but loaded with tension, "is this true?" Caroline turned to him, her eyes shining with tears, but they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of someone being cornered. "Of course not. She's making all this up because she's desperate. Look at her, Daniel. She clearly needs psychiatric help." But the defense sounded hollow, too desperate, and everyone in the ballroom noticed. Vincent stepped forward, placing himself beside Tiffany, not as physical protection, but as validation, as support, as someone who finally believed her. "I'm going to investigate this," he said, looking directly at Caroline. "I'll hire the best investigators. I'll go through every email, every record, every digital trail until I find the truth." His voice was pure ice. "And if she's telling the truth, Caroline, you're going to pay for every second of suffering you caused." Caroline went pale. She knew Vincent had unlimited resources, knew he didn't make empty threats, and knew, more than anyone, that evidence existed because she hadn't been careful enough. She'd been arrogant, and arrogance always leaves traces.
The silence that followed was deafening. Guests whispered among themselves, judgmental looks multiplied, and Caroline, for the first time in her life, realized she was alone. Daniel stared at her with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. Vincent looked at her with contempt, and Tiffany looked at her like someone who had finally recovered something that had been stolen. Not revenge, not hatred, but voice. The ability to say, in front of everyone, that she hadn't been crazy or incompetent or guilty, that she had been a victim, and that the truth, however buried it was, always finds a way to resurface. Caroline tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come, so she did what people like her always do when cornered, turned her back and left the ballroom, her head held high in a final attempt to preserve dignity. But everyone knew, everyone had seen, and when the door closed behind her, Tiffany felt her legs finally give way. Vincent caught her before she fell, and for the first time in 2 years, she let someone hold her, because finally, she wasn't alone anymore. Finally, someone believed her, and that, in that moment, was worth more than any legal verdict, though Vincent was already determined to get both.
3 weeks had passed since that night. Vincent kept his promise. He hired forensic investigators who scoured every server, every backup, every digital record from Tiffany's former company, and they found everything. Emails drafted on Caroline's personal computer, access logs to Tiffany's files, deleted conversations but recovered where Caroline meticulously planned every step of the setup. It was more than enough. It was devastating. The lawsuit was filed. Caroline Mercer was formally charged with defamation, falsification of documents, and conspiracy. Her reputation imploded overnight. The wedding was canceled. Daniel left her publicly, and everything she'd built on lies collapsed like a house of cards. But for Tiffany, victory tasted bitter. Because while Caroline paid for what she'd done, Tiffany felt something she didn't expect: shame. Vincent had offered her a place to stay, a small but comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood. He'd given her clothes, food, security. He even started talking about a job, about rebuilding her career. And she accepted it all at first. But as the days passed, gratitude was suffocated by a darker feeling. She felt indebted, dependent, as if she'd traded freedom on the streets for the golden cage of being a billionaire's charity project. It wasn't his fault. Vincent never made her feel inferior. But she felt that way anyway, because believing she deserved this was harder than surviving the cold of the sidewalks. One night, while Vincent was away on business, Tiffany packed her bags. She didn't have much, just the clothes he'd given her and a few personal belongings. She left a short note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for everything, but I need to do this alone." It was only 9 words, but they carried the weight of everything she couldn't say. That she was afraid of getting used to this and then losing it all again. That she didn't know how to be loved without feeling weak.
that she needed to prove to herself she could stand up again without crutches, without saviors, without depending on anyone. So she picked up the small suitcase, closed the door behind her, and disappeared into Chicago's rainy night. Vincent returned 2 days later and found the apartment empty. The note was there, solitary, on the table, and as he read it, something inside him broke. He called dozens of times, sent messages, but the phone he'd given her was turned off. She simply vanished. And for the first time since losing his fiancée to his best friend, Vincent felt a different fear. It wasn't fear of loneliness. It was fear that Tiffany was somewhere alone, believing she didn't deserve to be cared for, convinced she needed to carry the world on her own shoulders to prove her own worth. He hired people to look for her, but Tiffany knew the streets, knew how to hide, and didn't want to be found.
But the truth was that Tiffany wasn't okay. She'd gotten a temporary job at a coffee shop, rented a tiny room in a cheap boarding house, and tried to convince herself this was freedom, that this was dignity. But every night, lying in that narrow bed that smelled of mildew, she thought about him, about the way Vincent looked at her, not with pity, but with admiration, about the way he held her hand that night in the ballroom, as if saying silently, "I'm here, you're not alone." And missing that hurt more than any cold she'd ever felt on the streets, because the cold of the streets was physical, but the cold she felt now was emotional. It was the loneliness of someone who pushes away the only human being who truly cared. One night, after an exhausting shift at the coffee shop, Tiffany returned to her room under a violent storm. Rain fell like blades, soaking her clothes, making her bones ache. She climbed the creaky stairs, opened the door to the cramped little room, and stopped. Vincent was there, sitting in the only chair in the room, soaked too, as if he'd waited hours in the rain until he could track her down. He didn't say anything immediately, just looked at her with those tired eyes, wounded, but still full of something Tiffany couldn't name. And then he spoke, his voice hoarse. "Why, did you run away?"
Tiffany felt tears rise, but tried to hold them back. "Because I don't want to be your charity project, Vincent. I don't want you to take care of me because you feel sorry for me." He stood slowly, taking a step toward her, and his voice came out firmer, more intense. "Pity? You think this is pity?" He ran his hand over his wet face, frustrated, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I'm not helping you because I feel sorry for you, Tiffany. I'm helping you because since that night I found you on the sidewalk, I can't stop thinking about you. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because when I'm near you, I feel alive again." He paused, took a deep breath, and released the truth he'd been holding since the beginning. "I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want this to be a deal or help or anything else that makes you feel indebted. I want you. For real. Because I fell in love with you."
Tiffany froze. Vincent's words echoed in the small room like thunder that wouldn't dissipate. He had said it. He'd really said it. And she didn't know whether to laugh or cry, whether to run or stay, whether to believe or doubt, because believing meant allowing herself something she'd sworn never to do again: trust. Give her heart to someone and hope they wouldn't destroy it like Caroline had destroyed her life. But as she looked at Vincent, soaked, vulnerable, with those eyes that asked not for pity but for a chance, she realized something fundamental. He wasn't there because he wanted to save her. He was there because in some twisted and unexpected way, they had saved each other. And that, perhaps, was the purest form of love that exists. She took a step forward, her voice coming out shaky but honest. "I fell in love with you too, Vincent, and it terrifies me." He held her face between his hands, gentle, like someone holding something precious that could break at any moment. "Why does it terrify you?" Tiffany closed her eyes, finally letting the tears fall. "Because I lost everything once, and if I lose you too, I don't know if I survive again." He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing together, sharing the same air, the same fear, the same fragile hope. "You won't lose me, and I won't lose you, because this time, Tiffany, we both chose this. No one forced us, no one deceived us. It's just you and me. And that is enough."
She opened her eyes and saw in this man the world knew as an untouchable billionaire, just a broken human being trying to put himself back together, just like her. Two survivors of different storms finding shelter in each other. And then, for the first time in a long time, Tiffany allowed herself to believe, allowed herself to fall, allowed herself to trust that this time there would be someone to catch her. She kissed Vincent slowly, with an intensity that came not from unbridled passion, but from complete surrender. The kind of kiss that seals silent promises. The kind that says, "I choose you, despite the fear. I choose us, despite the scars." And when they pulled apart, both knew that something had changed irreversibly. It was no longer a deal, no longer charity. It was love. Simple, imperfect, but absolutely real. The following months were of reconstruction, not just of Tiffany's life, but of their life together. Vincent helped her resume her career, not with jobs he invented, but by connecting her with law firms that recognized her talent the moment she walked through the door. Tiffany enrolled in continuing education courses, remade professional contacts, and gradually, the competent legal assistant who had been buried under rubble of false accusations resurfaced. But this time, she was stronger, wiser, because she'd survived the worst and discovered there was still goodness in the world. And Vincent, he learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that letting someone in didn't mean losing control, that true love didn't require perfection, it required presence. It was on a winter afternoon, with snow falling gently over Chicago, that Vincent took her to the bridge over the river. It was the same river Tiffany used to watch when she still lived on the streets, wondering if she'd ever cross to the other side, to the life that seemed to belong only to others. Now, she was there, with him, and the other side was no longer a distant dream. He stopped in the middle of the bridge, held her hands, and when he spoke, his voice came out calm but full of contained emotion. "Tiffany Erickson, you taught me that courage isn't never being afraid. It's being afraid and choosing to love anyway." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and when he opened it, Tiffany saw a simple ring, elegant, perfect. "Marry me, not because I want to save you, but because I want to build a life by your side." Tiffany looked at the ring, then at him, and for the first time in years, felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Complete hope. Not that fragile hope that kept her alive on the streets, but solid hope, anchored, of someone who'd finally found a safe harbor. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you."
He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her right there in the middle of the bridge, while snow fell around them as if the universe were celebrating along with them. People passed by, some smiled, others took pictures, but for Tiffany and Vincent, the entire world had disappeared. There was only that moment, that kiss, that promise that together they could face any storm.
The wedding happened months later, in an intimate ceremony in a snow-covered garden. Few guests, but all genuine. Daniel Foster was there. He and Vincent had talked at length, and although the friendship would never be the same, there was mutual respect and silent forgiveness. Caroline wasn't invited. She was serving her sentence for her crimes and, according to rumors, trying to rebuild a life away from the spotlight. Tiffany no longer felt anger toward her. She felt only indifference, because Caroline no longer had power over her, no longer occupied space in her thoughts, no longer mattered. And the day Tiffany realized that, she felt truly free. Years later, in a bright apartment overlooking the city, Tiffany sat on the couch with her hand on her round belly, 7 months pregnant. Vincent came in with 2 cups of tea, sat beside her, and placed his hand over hers, feeling the baby move. "Do you think she'll look like you?" he asked, smiling. Tiffany laughed softly. "I hope so, but I hope she has your heart." Vincent kissed her forehead, and they stayed there, in silence, watching the snow fall once more over Chicago. The same city that almost destroyed them. The same city that brought them together. And Tiffany thought about everything she'd been through. The pain, the loss, the loneliness, the cutting cold of the streets, and realized that all of it, in some strange and almost cruel way, had led her exactly there, to that moment, to that love, to that life that finally was hers and no one else's.
Just as Tiffany discovered that love can transform even the coldest nights into illuminated new beginnings, each of us also carries that power of transformation within ourselves. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to believe, to trust, to allow ourselves to be loved, even when fear insists on building walls around the heart. True courage isn't in never falling, but in getting up, straightening our posture, and moving forward, believing that the best is still to come. If this story touched you, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." And don't forget, subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Because here, every story is an invitation to believe in the impossible, to feel deeply, and to remember that love, true, courageous, and liberating, is always worth it. And this was just one of the many stories that will still move you here.